Night driving has a way of changing the world around you. The familiar colors of the day fade into long stretches of dim highway, the kind where the only light comes from the soft glow of dashboard instruments and the distant blink of passing signs. Rest areas appear like small pockets of stillness along the road, a few empty parking spaces, a pair of dim lamps humming above cracked pavement, and the faint rustle of trees shifting in the wind. They're meant to be safe places to pause, to breathe, to let the silence settle in for a moment before the journey continues. But sometimes, when the hours get late enough and the world feels too quiet, you begin to notice things you wouldn't usually think about. The way the air feels colder near certain corners of the lot, or how the shadows under the picnic tables look just a little too deep. You might hear a soft sound from somewhere behind the restrooms, something light like gravel shifting or the quiet tap of a shoe that isn't yours. At first, you tell yourself it's nothing more than your mind filling the emptiness with noise. Yet there's a different kind of stillness that lingers in some rest areas after midnight, a kind that makes you hesitate before stepping out of your car. It's in the way the lights flicker without fully going out, the way the wind seems to pause instead of blow, the way your breath sounds too loud as you listen for anything else. Most people don't stay long enough to question it. Most people keep moving before the quiet turns into something they can't explain. Tonight, these stories come from the ones who stayed just a moment too long. And this is where the first one begins. I've spent enough nights on the road to know the difference between a normal rest area and one that feels wrong. This one didn't look strange at first. It was just past 1 in the morning, a quiet patch beside a long stretch of interstate where the lights buzzed faintly and the pavement shimmered from a light rain earlier in the evening. I was exhausted, the kind of tired where the lines on the road start to soften and you realize you should stop before your mind drifts too far. The rest area had only two other cars parked far off to the right, engines cold, windows dark. It felt empty in a peaceful sort of way, the kind where you think you'll stretch, grab a soda, and get back on the road without a second thought. I pulled into a space close to the building, where the vending machine stood under a flickering fluorescent tube that made everything look washed out. I could hear the hum of the refrigeration units, the soft clicking of a bug trapped behind one of the lights, and the distant rustle of wind brushing against the trash cans. As I stepped out of the car, the air felt cooler than I expected, a damp chill settling across my shoulders. I stretched for a moment, breathing in the silence before walking toward the machines. That's when I first saw him, a man standing between the soda machine and the snack machine, facing forward but slightly angled as though he'd been caught mid-decision. I hadn't noticed him from the car. He didn't move when I approached. He didn't even flinch. I slowed down before reaching the machines, partly because something about his posture looked a little off. His head was tilted slightly downward and his arms hung loosely at his sides instead of resting on his hips or adjusting his pockets the way most people do when they're deciding what to buy. I stood a few feet away, trying not to stare, but the closer I got, the more I realized something was wrong. He wasn't looking at the machine. His face wasn't angled toward the glass or the keypad. It was angled just a little toward me, like he'd been waiting for me to walk over. I pressed a few buttons on the soda machine just to give my hand something to do. The machine rattled and spit out a cold can. I stepped back and popped it open, glancing at the man from the corner of my eye. His clothes looked ordinary enough: jeans, a dark jacket, shoes damp from the wet pavement, but he still hadn't moved. Not a shift of weight, not a flicker of his eyes toward what I was doing. His stillness felt unnatural, the kind of rigidity you'd expect from someone holding their breath for too long. I cleared my throat softly, just to break the tension, and walked back toward my car. By the time I reached the door, I realized I hadn't heard him drop any coins or push any buttons on the machines. The thought made me hesitate. I looked back over my shoulder. He was still there, but something told me he wasn't standing in exactly the same place. It was subtle, just a slight adjustment in distance, like he was a half step closer to where I'd been standing. Maybe I'd misjudged it. Maybe the shadows had shifted. But a tight knot formed in my stomach, the kind that made my pulse quicken. I got into my car quickly and locked the doors out of instinct more than fear. I sat there for a moment, telling myself that I was just tired. But when I leaned forward slightly to check the angle of the vending machines again, the man turned his head. Not all the way toward me, just a small, precise tilt that made it undeniably clear he knew I was watching him. The motion light above the machines flickered once, dimmed, and then steadied. For a second, I thought I saw something strange in his reflection on the soda machine, a longer shape, a darker outline, but the vending machine light buzzed so softly I couldn't be sure. I should have driven away then, but exhaustion made me pause. I cracked open the soda and took a sip, trying to calm myself. My breath fogged slightly in the cool air inside the car, and when I exhaled again, I noticed something I hadn't before. The man's shadow wasn't lining up properly. He stood directly under the bright fluorescent light, but his shadow stretched toward the vending machines instead of away from them, as though the light source was coming from the opposite direction. I blinked a few times, leaned forward, and then reclined again, unsure if I was imagining it. Shadows can play tricks on you when you're tired. But then he took a step. It wasn't a normal step. His foot moved, but the motion was too slow, like someone dragging themselves through thick mud. His body didn't sway or shift. It was as if the step pulled the rest of him forward unnaturally. Then another step. This one a little smoother, but still wrong in a way that made my skin crawl. The soda can felt cold against my fingers. I lowered it slowly, heart beating louder now. I watched him approach the edge of the concrete pad where the vending machines stood. He didn't look around, he didn't look at me, he just walked. I fumbled for my keys, trying not to let them clatter too loudly. The sound of them slipping between my fingers felt amplified in the quiet night. I turned the key in the ignition and the engine rumbled to life. The man stopped walking the moment the engine started mid-step, like the sound froze him. The fluorescent light above him flickered again, and this time it didn't steady. It stuttered rapidly, creating a strobe effect that turned his figure into a series of still images, standing, lining, standing again, all in split-second flashes. I couldn't tell if he was moving or just caught in the flicker. I put the car in reverse, my breathing shallow. As I backed out, the headlights caught him full on, and that's when I saw his face clearly for the first time. It wasn't horrifying in a traditional sense, no blood, no deformity, but it was empty in a way that made something deep in my chest twist. His eyes looked dark, unfocused, like they weren't meant for seeing. His mouth hung slightly open as though he was trying to speak but couldn't quite form the words, or like he'd forgotten how. I shifted into drive and pressed down on the accelerator. The vending machine area faded quickly behind me, swallowed by the dark as I merged back onto the interstate. For several miles, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting to see headlights behind me or a dark figure standing in the distance. But the road stayed empty. Just the long, quiet stretch of highway illuminated by my own lights. It wasn't until 30 minutes later, when I stopped at a gas station in a different town, that I realized my shirt was damp with sweat. My hands trembled slightly when I paid for more fuel. The cashier asked if I was all right, and I lied, saying I'd been on the road too long. I didn't tell him about the man at the vending machines, or the way his movements didn't match the light, or the way his shadow bent in the wrong direction. Sometimes, when I stop at a rest area now, I catch myself looking at the vending machines before anything else, searching for silhouettes that stand too still or shadows that fall the wrong way. I don't know what I saw that night, or whether it was something that was ever human in the first place. All I know is that rest areas don't feel peaceful anymore. Not since the night someone, or something, waited for me beneath a flickering light, standing so still it felt like it had been expecting me all along. I was halfway through a long overnight drive when I decided to pull off at mile 223. It wasn't a place I'd normally stop, just a small rest area carved into a stretch of highway surrounded by fields and open land. The kind of place you pass without a second glance during the day. But it was nearly 2 in the morning and I'd been fighting sleep for the last 30 miles. My eyes kept blurring at the edges, and the hum of the road had started to feel like a lullaby. So when I saw the sign for the rest area, I took the exit, telling myself I'd only stay a few minutes, just long enough to clear my head. The lot was almost empty. One old pickup sat near the far end, dark and silent, its windows completely fogged from the inside. A couple of dim street lamps flickered above the cracked pavement, casting long shadows that made everything look softer, less defined. The air was cold when I stepped out of the car, colder than I expected for late autumn. I remember thinking how quiet it felt there. No traffic on the highway, no wind, just the faint creak of the metal restroom door shifting when the building cooled. It was the kind of stillness that feels peaceful at first, but leaves you listening a little too closely. I stretched my legs, rolled my shoulders, and walked toward the restroom building. The fluorescent light above the doorway buzzed in a tired way, flickering every few seconds like it was trying to stay awake as much as I was. Inside, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and something older, like damp concrete. I washed my face with cold water and stared at myself in the streaked mirror, trying to convince myself I didn't look as tired as I felt. When I stepped back outside, I noticed something small but strange. The fog on the windows of the old pickup had begun to clear. Slowly, as though someone inside had wiped part of the glass. I paused mid-step. The shape had been a handprint, faint but unmistakable. I stared at it for a second, waiting to see if it disappeared or if more prints appeared beside it. Nothing moved. The mist on the rest of the windows remained perfectly still. I swallowed the uneasy feeling creeping into my chest and walked back to my car, telling myself I must have imagined it. Maybe the fog had just shifted, maybe dew had rolled down the glass. But the longer I tried to explain it, the less convincing my own reasoning sounded. I got into my car and locked the doors out of habit, resting my head back against the headrest. I planned to close my eyes for a minute or two just to let the exhaustion drain out, but the moment I turned off the engine, I heard something. It was faint, soft, dragging footsteps across gravel. Not hurried, not hesitant, just slow and steady. My first instinct was to look in the mirrors, but when I checked the driver's side mirror, all I saw was darkness and the halo of the nearest street lamp. The passenger side mirror showed nothing but the empty spaces beside me. Still, the footsteps continued, circling the back of the car with the unmistakable rhythm of someone walking just out of sight. My heartbeat picked up in this slow, uncomfortable way that made my breath stick slightly in my throat. I leaned forward, trying to listen through the quiet hum of the cooling engine. The steps stopped behind the trunk. For several seconds, everything went silent again. Then came a gentle tapping, barely audible, on the back window. 3 soft taps, measured, almost polite. I didn't turn around, not immediately. Something in me froze so completely that even shifting my eyes felt dangerous. When I finally forced myself to look in the rearview mirror, I saw nothing. Just the faint reflection of my own face and the empty pavement behind me. I started the engine again, hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. The headlights swept across the lot, illuminating nothing but the restroom building and a few empty parking spaces. I glanced toward the old pickup. The handprint was gone. Every inch of glass was fogged again, thick and undisturbed. I almost put the car in drive when something stopped me, a shape moving near the restroom building. It wasn't a person, at least not one walking normally. It darted from the corner of the building to the shadow beside a trash can with a quick, unnatural glide, like it didn't have weight or it didn't know how to use its legs properly. The motion light above the building flickered once, twice, then went completely dark. My breath hitched, my pulse hammering against my ribs. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't bring myself to take my foot off the brake. It felt like the air had thickened, like moving would draw attention to me. I stared at the building, watching for any sign of movement, but the shadows stayed still. Just when I convinced myself I'd imagined the shape, something stepped into the orange glow of the farthest street lamp. It wasn't close enough for me to see clearly, but it was tall, taller than any person I'd seen, with shoulders that sloped too sharply and a head that hung at a strange angle, as if the neck didn't quite support it. The figure paused directly beneath the lamp, and that's when the light flickered violently, casting it in jerky, stuttered silhouettes. For a moment, it looked like its arms were too long. Then the light steadied again, and the figure disappeared completely, like it had stepped backward into darkness faster than the eye could follow. That broke whatever spell had kept me in place. I slammed the car into reverse so fast the tires skidded slightly on the pavement. As I backed out, the headlights swept across the lot, and in that brief sweep, I saw something standing behind the passenger side of my car, close enough that if the window had been open, I could have touched it. But the moment the light hit it, it vanished. Or maybe it ducked, I didn't want to know which. I pulled onto the exit ramp and pressed the accelerator harder than I should have, trying not to look into my mirrors. The highway felt like a relief, even in the darkness, even in the isolation. For several miles, I kept expecting to see headlights behind me or a shadow standing on the side of the road or something clinging to the back of my car. But the road stayed empty. Just the yellow stripes passing beneath me again and again, reminding me I was putting distance between myself and whatever had been there. When I reached a gas station in the next town, I parked under the brightest lights I could find. I checked the back of the car, the windows, the trunk, everything. There were no marks, no signs of anything touching the glass. The world looked normal again. It took me a long time to feel my heartbeat settle and even longer to convince myself I hadn't imagined the whole thing. But I know I didn't fall asleep in that rest area. I know I heard footsteps circling my car. I know something tapped on the window. And I know there was a shape under that street lamp that wasn't human. I haven't stopped at mile 223 since. Whenever I drive that stretch of road now, even during the day, I feel a pull in my stomach, like something at that rest area remembers me. Some nights, if I'm driving late enough and the highway gets too quiet, I swear I can hear faint footsteps on the gravel again, just on the edge of hearing. Quiet, slow, waiting for me to stop. I pulled into the rest area a little after 2 a.m., the kind of hour where the world feels half asleep and the darkness seems heavier than usual. I'd been driving for almost 7 hours straight, and my eyes were beginning to sting from the constant focus on the road. The parking lot was nearly empty except for an older RV parked toward the far end, its white paint dulled to a soft gray under the dim amber lights. The place felt unusually quiet, not peaceful, but still in a way that made every sound carry farther than it should. I parked a few spaces away from the RV, grateful just to turn off the engine and let the silence settle around me. There was something comforting about having another vehicle nearby, even if it looked worn down and a little outdated. All its curtains were drawn thick beige ones in the windshield, patterned ones along the sides, even a small curtain in the back window. I figured a family or an older couple must be sleeping inside. The folding chair leaning against the side and the pair of boots by the step made the RV feel lived in, like whoever was inside had stopped earlier that day and settled in for a long night. I stretched, letting the cool air wake me a little, and decided I'd sit in the driver's seat for a few minutes before heading to the restroom. As soon as I turned off the interior light and the car went dark, the rest area felt unnervingly still. The street lamps buzzed faintly, throwing long shadows that stretched across the pavement. The RV sat in that pool of dim light, its drawn curtains looking more like closed eyes. I stared at it for a moment, wondering what it must be like to sleep in something so compact on nights like this. The silence made me aware of every small sound inside my car, the ticking of the cooling engine, the soft creak of the seat as I shifted. Then I heard something I couldn't explain. A tapping sound came from the RV. It was faint but rhythmic, like the soft tap of knuckles on a window. 3 taps, a pause, then 2 more. I sat still, unsure whether I had heard it correctly. After a few seconds, it happened again, same pattern, same measured pace. I leaned forward, trying to see if someone inside had gotten up or if maybe an animal had brushed against it. But the curtains were drawn so tightly that not even a sliver of light escaped. The RV didn't move at all. Not a shake, not a shift, nothing. I tried to brush it off. People move around in their sleep. Maybe someone had knocked something over inside. Maybe it was nothing more than the RV settling as it cooled. But the tapping continued, and the longer I listened, the clearer it became that it wasn't random. It was deliberate, almost patient. I finally decided to get out and head to the restroom. Hopping the walk would clear my mind. The gravel crunched under my shoes as I walked across the lot, and the cold air bit at my face. The restrooms were just a small cinder block building with a flickering sign, and the moment I stepped inside, the sharp smell of disinfectant overwhelmed me. I washed my hands, splashed cold water on my face, and avoided looking too long at my reflection. I didn't want to imagine anything watching me from behind. When I stepped back outside, the night felt different, heavier. As I walked toward my car, I realized the tapping was gone, replaced by a deeper, more unsettling sound, a slow dragging, like fingertips sliding across glass. I froze halfway across the lot. The sound came from the direction of the RV. I forced myself to keep walking, each step feeling too loud in the stillness. When I reached my car, I opened the door as quietly as I could and slipped inside, locking the doors before I even sat down fully. I told myself to start the engine and drive away, just go, but something held me there, a curiosity or some strange instinct that wanted to make sense of what I was hearing. I turned off the headlights and sat in the dark, watching the RV through the windshield. The folding chair was still leaning against the side and the boots were still by the step. Nothing had changed. But then the curtain in one of the side windows moved. Not by much, just the slightest shift, like something from inside had brushed against it or pressed lightly against the fabric. The movement repeated, a subtle, steady push outward, as though something was running its hand slowly across the inside of the window. The fabric bunched slightly, then relaxed. Then bunched again, my breath hitched. I leaned forward instinctively, eyes narrowing at the pattern of movement. It wasn't random. It followed a path from the back window to the middle window, and then toward the windshield curtains. My chest tightened. Someone was awake in there. Someone was walking inside. But that didn't explain why the boots outside the RV hadn't moved, or why the folding chair sat untouched, or why I'd seen no light from inside. Everything somehow felt wrong. The curtain closest to the front dipped inward suddenly, as though pressed by a face leaning close. I jolted back in my seat. The curtain stayed that way for a long moment, bulging inward, holding its shape as though someone was breathing softly on the other side. Then it slowly receded, fabric smoothing out like nothing had happened. I couldn't breathe. For a second, I felt a strange certainty. Whatever was behind that curtain didn't want me to see it. I reached for my keys, trying not to make noise when I heard something new. A sharp thump from inside the RV, then another, something heavy shifting. Then the soft scrape of what sounded like feet or hands moving toward the entrance door. I thought it would open, I braced for it, but it didn't. Instead, the curtain in the back window began to lift. Not all at once, slowly, hand over hand, a deliberate rise of fabric as though someone or something was lifting it with care. A strip of darkness appeared beneath it, deeper than the night outside, as if the inside of the RV had no light at all. Not even a glow from electronics or moonlight leaking through the windshield. Nothing. Then a hand appeared against the glass. It was thin, too thin, with fingers longer than they should have been, pressing softly against the pane as though feeling its way outward. The hand stayed there, resting lightly, almost tenderly. My body reacted before my mind did. I turned the key, started the engine, and backed out so fast the tires spun slightly on the loose gravel. The hand didn't move. It stayed pressed against the glass, just watching as I pulled away, or feeling, I don't know. As I drove onto the highway, my pulse hammered against my ribs so hard it felt like it might bruise them. I didn't stop again until I reached a brightly lit gas station 20 miles away. I sat there under the bright canopy, forcing myself to breathe normally. A part of me wanted to call the police. Another part told me not to. What would I say? That I'd seen a long-fingered hand in a dark RV? That curtains had moved like they were alive? I didn't go back to check if anyone needed help. I knew deep down that whatever was moving inside that RV wasn't a person who needed saving. So a week later, I passed mile 223 again in daylight. The rest area looked normal, too normal. No RV, no boots, no chair. The concrete pad where the RV had been parked still had faint tire marks, fresh enough to say the vehicle hadn't been there long. But something about the space felt hollow, like the air hadn't fully healed from something heavy sitting there. Sometimes, late at night when I'm driving, I see an old RV on the road ahead or behind me. I never get close enough to check the windows. I never look for drawn curtains or handprints. I switch lanes, slow down, or speed up, anything to avoid driving beside it. It's because I'm afraid that if I ever look into one of those windows again, something inside will be looking back, waiting for me to stop, waiting for me to get close, waiting to lift the curtain just enough for me to see what was never meant to leave whatever place it came from. There's a strange kind of silence that settles over the road after midnight, a silence that feels harmless until you step out of your car and realize how alone you really are. These stories remind us that rest areas, with all their bright lights and empty spaces, are places where the night feels just a little too close, where the distance between safety and something unexplainable is measured in a few steps across cracked pavement. The people in these stories weren't looking for trouble. They just stopped to breathe, to rest, to gather themselves before continuing on. And still, the darkness found them. If any part of tonight's stories felt familiar, a sound you've heard, a shape you've glimpsed, a moment where your instincts pulled at you, then you understand more than most how thin the veil can be on those quiet stretches of highway. There's a comfort in knowing others have felt that same unease, the same sudden awareness that they aren't as alone as the night wants them to believe. These late tower confessions are reminders that sometimes the strangest things wait not in the woods or the abandoned buildings, but in the places built for us to feel safe. As the night settles around you again, take a moment before turning off the lights. Let your mind slow down, let your breath steady. And if you want to return to these quiet stories, to the ones whispered softly enough to unsettle without breaking the calm, you're welcome to stay with this channel. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more, or simply come back when the roads feel long and the darkness feels heavy. But for now, rest if you can. The night outside will keep its distance, at least until you choose to stop again.